Good morning, everyone. It is 10:30, and I see we have about 55 participants. We're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Stephanie Holmes Webster, and I am your host today for the Section 31A State School Act Review. This is the legislative update for this school year. The effective date of this year's legislation for Section 31A took place on October 1st, 2019. Everyone has been muted, so I just want to ask that if you have questions, that you want to wait until the end of the presentation to ask those questions. There's lots of folks that probably want to hear the same answers. The second thing, if this is your first time using Zoom, I do have everybody muted. You can unmute yourselves by the end of the presentation if you'd like to verbally ask a question. The other thing that you want to know is that there is also a chat feature. So if you think like you won't remember the question, you can put it in the chat box and we can go to the chat box at the end of the presentation. So we'll go ahead and get started. So some of the key takeaways for today's presentation is to review the legislation from each subsection, but to also talk about relevant topics and pushing forward achievement for at-risk eligible students. So what you do need to know, for some of you who have not heard, that redirection and accountability for Section 31A has been taken out of this year's legislation. So the vast majority of the law has remained consistent. The one change that we know everyone is waiting for us to confirm is about regarding redirection. So that has been taken out, but we want to reassure you that you still need to stay focused on third grade reading, 8th grade math, 11th grade career and college readiness, and reducing chronic absenteeism. Those are still things that are intent and purpose of the Section 31A legislation. Monitor indicators are currently getting an update, and so are the FAQs, but the work has not changed. So you still do need to evaluate the effectiveness of 31A programs and ensure that what you're doing is providing for the desired outcomes or desired improved outcomes. And in the next couple of slides, you'll see why we say we still have to remain focused. So let's talk about subsection 1. Subsection 1 is all about the intent and purposes. So Section 31A funding, all decisions should go back to what is the intent and purpose? Is it to ensure that students are proficient in ELA or proficient in reading by the end of grade 3, proficient in mathematics by the end of grade 8, career and college ready in our 11th grade assessments, and that pupils are attending school regularly. And also Section 31A, in partnership with the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services, also provides primary healthcare services and hearing and vision screenings. So in talking about evaluating our program effectiveness still, because those are still some things that we do ask about, we want to look at one part of the whole, and one part of the intent and purpose is third grade ELA. What you see here are two sets of data, one 2017-18 MSTEP results, and the other 2018-19 MSTEP results. On the third grade ELA summative assessment. The data on the left represents students identified as economically disadvantaged. So the data on the left within each set of boxes recognizes those students that are economically disadvantaged. The data on the right represent the student peers who were not identified as ED. The blue are the representation of percentage of students demonstrating proficiency on MSTEP ELA, and the orange are the percentage of students who are not demonstrating proficiency. So if you look at third grade MSTEP, you see that we still have a lot of opportunity gaps that exist in our students that are coded economically disadvantaged and our students that are non-disadvantaged. The next set of data is what you see for one part of the whole for 8th grade. So 8th grade math. So this represents 2 years of scores for 8th grade math, summative assessments, either in PSAT or MSTEP. So as you all know, in 2018-19, you all transitioned to the PSAT assessment for 8th grade math. And in 2017-18, you were taking the MSTEP. The data on the left within each side of the box represents the ED students' proficiency, and the data on the right represents those students that are non-economically disadvantaged students. The purple representation of the percentage of students demonstrating proficiency are the M-STEP ELA, and the orange are the percentage of students not demonstrating proficiency. I'm sorry, that was in math. So as you see, still a lot of opportunity gaps exist between our economically disadvantaged and also our non-disadvantaged students within the state of Michigan. The next two slides demonstrate 11th grade data. This slide shows 2 years of scores on 11th grade SAT assessment and evidence-based reading and writing. And the data on the left represent ED students. The data on the right represent non-economically disadvantaged students. The green are a representation of percentage of students demonstrating proficiency on the evidence-based reading and writing assessment, and the orange are the percentage of students who are not demonstrating proficiency. Again, we look at 8th grade data, 11th grade data, but this slide shows 2 years of scores on 11th grade math summative assessments. The data on the left represent ED students. And again, the data on the right represents our non-economically disadvantaged students. The pink are a representation of percentage of students demonstrating proficiency on M-STEP ELA. And the orange are a percentage of students who are not demonstrating proficiency. So the data clearly demonstrates we still have more work to do as a state because even 80% proficiency has to rely on all of our students in the state, not just our economically disadvantaged, but also our non-disadvantaged students. So now that we review some of the summative assessment data, one of the other intent and purposes of the legislation is to reduce chronic absenteeism in the LEA. There's a lot of research available to us that will help us to identify and apply tiered level strategies to increase regular attendance in the LEA. Research identifies one of the strongest solutions available to us is to proactively focus on students and their families. Relationships are key to engaging families and improving the school's culture and climate. Strategies for improving students' absenteeism align with the MTSS framework that is being implemented with fidelity, engaging family and community, and will improve the school's culture and climate. There's a lot of good resources that have been provided here for you through Attendix Works, which is a nonprofit organization, but they have a lot of good research on what helps students come back to the schools, what helps to engage parents with the community, and also how to get those community partners to help you engage those students in what needs to happen in terms of improving attendance. And the key thing is removing barriers for students and families that are experiencing chronic absenteeism, and that's another component of the intent and purpose of Section 31A. This is just one of the available resources, but the attendance playbook is one of those that we do recommend that the LEA looks at. So these are statewide data results for attendance and chronic absenteeism. Our statewide attendance rate is 93%, and chronic absenteeism rate across the state is almost 20%. Our students who are not chronically absent and are on average attending 96% of the time are still missing a little over 7 days of school. So our chronically absent students are attending about 80%, which is about 36 days of 180 school days, missing about 7 weeks of school. You want to make sure that the leadership team is checking into the LEA's current attendance data and chronic absenteeism figures. This is the data that the team needs to review quarterly to assess the effectiveness of proactive attendance policies and tiered level supports for families, groups, and individual students the LEA is targeting. One of the most important questions that an attendance team or a leadership team at the district level can ask is, are the LEA's current attendance policies reducing chronic absenteeism for Tier 2 students and families? If no, what is the strategy for revising the policy? So if you're just starting with looking at chronic absenteeism and identifying who you need to work with first, make sure you're looking at attendance from a tiered level way of support in the way that you can leverage those who you can get into the schools a lot quicker, which in most cases are our tier 2 families, because they're the groups or families of students that are unable to get to school for whatever reason. They have some kind of socioeconomic circumstance or a barrier. And then we can still delve into tier 3s, but our tier 2s are our best bet for really improving our attendance very quickly. Subsection 2 is about out-of-formula LEA eligibility. So this simply means that if you were hold harmless before, 2 years ago, you began receiving some of the Section 31A funding, and that means that your district allowance was too high. So before you did not qualify, and now that the LEA does, that you receive 30% of what the LEA would otherwise be eligible for if you had qualified. So one of the things that you want to make sure of is that you are identifying your economically disadvantaged students and that they're accurately being identified. So by mid-October, LEA should know your estimated Section 31A amount. This was kind of late this year because of the struggle with the legislation and getting the bill signed. It should be posted by now. And the LEAs will receive 9% of those funds in your October state aid payment. Payments are then distributed over 11 months until August. So this is why we talk about carryover, because August is that last time you will get a check for Section 31A. The Section 31A award amount is estimated because it can be reduced when new schools are added in the middle of the school year and those funds are redistributed. So if one LEA takes a 2% cut, that means everyone across the state of Michigan will take a 2% cut. Subsection 3 is about the assurances attached to the usage and the acceptance of using Section 31A money. And here are those key points. Anything that you do, also with meeting the intent and purpose of Section 31A, needs to also comply with the Read by Grade 3 law. You are using resources to address early literacy numeracy, and you must implement MTSS for at least K-12. So that means even if you have a high school, you had not previously been implementing MTSS in the high school, it is part of the legislation to be in compliance with the law. The high school must implement MTSS, a fidelity model framework. And so targeted universalism, we talk a little bit about because this is a different way, a more powerful way to make the transformational changes we need. Changes we need to improve life chances, promote inclusion, and enhance and sustain equitable policies and programs. Let's take a look at a short video and think about how this applies to the work we do for creating equitable conditions to ensure all of our students are successful in schools. So hopefully this link is going to work for you. If not, it is in the PowerPoint. You can play it at a later date.
What is the most effective and sustainable policy response to problems in our society? Universal approaches are widely used in order to package policies for broad appeal. Universal policies such as Social Security and minimum wage laws provide the same benefits or minimum protections to everyone, regardless of status or group membership. But by treating everyone the same, universal approaches can't root out group-based discrimination and may actually deepen inequality between groups rather than reduce it. And by providing benefits or protections to everyone, resources that could be targeted to groups worse off instead flow to those who are better off. In contrast to universalism, targeted approaches are commonly used. Targeted policies provide benefits or protections based on group membership or status. SNAP, the food stamp program, conditions benefits on income level. The Americans with Disabilities Act requires public accessibility for disabled groups, and affirmative action focuses on historically disadvantaged groups. Targeted approaches are vulnerable to the critique that they unfairly favor constituent groups over the public good by directing resources to marginalized groups who are already subjected to unfair stereotypes. But universal and targeted approaches are false choices. There is a third way: targeted universalism. Targeted universalism means setting universal goals that can be achieved through targeted approaches. This approach targets the varying needs of each group while reminding us that we are all part of the same social fabric. This can be accomplished by following these 5 steps. First, set a universal goal. For example, 100% proficiency in 8th grade math. Second, measure how the overall population fares relative to the universal goal. In this example, we might discover that only 80% of 8th graders are proficient in 8th grade math. Third, measure the performance of population segments relative to the universal goal. So although 80% of all 8th graders are proficient, we might find that only 70% of Latinos are proficient. Fourth, understand how structures and other factors support or impede groups' progress toward the universal goal. For our Latino students, classroom instruction materials and lessons designed for English speakers may impede learning, including math proficiency. Finally, implement targeted strategies so that each group can achieve the universal goal based upon their needs and circumstances. This may take the form of ESL-specific math tutoring for our Latino students, while another group may require a completely different strategy to achieve the same universal goal. Targeted universalism rejects a blanket universal, which may be indifferent to the reality that different groups are situated differently relative to the institutions and resources of society. By aspiring towards shared universal goals, targeted universalism empowers targeted strategies capable of achieving those goals, while moving us beyond concerns over disparities alone and toward our highest aspirations for all.
All right. So this really has to do a lot with how we define Section 31A funding. Section 31A is categorical funding. So that means that it does have a narrowly defined purpose, which is the reason why we always say when you do call us, please go back to the intent and purpose, and that who was the money for is for the most at-risk learners identified within the LEA. Hold on, we have a spinning circle here.
What is
I'm sorry, I was talking and you all couldn't hear me. So our MTSS system has 5 components in the state of Michigan. There's a team-based leadership, there's a comprehensive screening and assessment system, there's a tiered delivery system, a continuous database decision-making, and also selection and implementation of instruction, intervention, and supports. And of course, none of these things really can function without good fidelity and feedback, job embedded professional development, and parent and family community engagement activities. So although MTSS has been around for 25 years, the state of Michigan has also defined what MTSS would look like in the state of Michigan. So if you and your team have not had a chance, you do want to go to the MDE practice profile for multi-systems of support. And this is a collection of the comprehensive framework comprised of research-based strategies designed to meet the individual needs and assets of the whole child. I just want to make sure everybody is muted. And to intentionally interconnect the education, health, and human service systems in support of successful learners, schools, centers, and community outcomes. So if you haven't had a chance to do that, we encourage you to do so, to look at the MDE practice profile. So it matters very much how resources are used. I like this quote by George Batch, who was an innovator in RTI, which we refer to now as MTSS, but it speaks volumes about how resources are used in education, how the resources, the time, the money, the people, the materials, the equipment, the knowledge and skills, all the questions we have for you when you seek guidance from us and technical assistance about how to use the resources effectively, purposefully, and efficiently as possible is a key strategic leadership question. This is key for the entire leadership team to ponder, not just the business manager or the federal state programs manager to ask. Money creates the perfect case for aligning resources with our priorities, because as the narrative goes in education, we never have enough money, right? But more spending does not necessarily mean better outcomes. However, making the best use of our resources, which include money, we can adjust our focus from what money can buy to how we can use resources purposefully to support student learning. Here within the slide, there is a great resource about alignment. So hopefully you'll have time to check that out with your teams. So as we go into our 4th year of MTSS being a requirement of usage, we felt like as a team that we wanted to really kind of focus on, well, if you're implementing MTSS, what are some things that should rudimentary at the rudimentary level be in place? So is the district setting a vision for MTSS? How have you documented it? Have you created a legacy handbook? So that is one of the things we do ask about for on-site review, the MTSS handbook. And once you develop that legacy handbook, and it talks about how all your systems are communicated throughout the district and each building, you're sticking to that. So even if you change a superintendent or a major person within an administrative team, that everyone has the same handbook to go back to know those procedures and protocols are still in place. The third thing that we really ask questions about are, do you have the right people on the bus? So are you building the human systems that you need with those people that are compulsively driven to make whatever changes that need to be done? And that's how Jim Collins, a good coach, describes it. So MTS implementation is a team sport. Are you developing a strong data culture? Because MTSS has to have strong data and multiple measure pieces to really determine how well we're doing and how well students are moving. Data is the basis of all the decisions we make about the district's MTSS process and procedures, and it's also transparent to everyone in the building. Everyone in the building in the district should know the cut scores for the grade levels and benchmarks for meeting expectations and grade levels. So growth is just not enough sometimes. Are we meeting the benchmark cut scores? Have we established the cut scores across academics and behaviors? Have we clearly outlined MTSS district building and meeting schedules and cycles? When those meetings are going to take, whether they're going to take place quarterly or they're going to take place 4 times a year. And how are we facilitating the improvement process around MTSS? So this means continually revisiting the MTSS process while you're also completing your continuous improvement process. They fit very perfectly together. So some best practices for implementing MTSS. Consistent service delivery. So not reinventing the wheel for every school and every student. You want to strive to deliver consistent services across the entire district. The goal is to provide individualized support to every student, and it's not efficient or repeatable to write a new behavior plan every time a student acts out or shows sign of struggle. You want to develop district level systems and core MTSS values to ensure that students are getting the best possible support at every school. Focusing on building strong, preventative, and proactive bases of support at Tier 1. This helps to establish the MTSS culture in your district. The district's MTSS culture should be interwoven into Tier 1 expectations for behavior, academic, and social emotional learning. In Tier 2, creating student support teams to mobilize around the students that need it. Whatever the name of the team you call it, whether it's the SST or the CHATs, the child assistance teams, they are made up of principals, assistant principals, counselors, and behavior interventionists. These teams should be meeting at a minimum bi-weekly. So keeping the intervention menu simple. This is one huge step. Group-based interventions over always having individualized interventions. Your money could stretch a lot further in Tier 2 supports with group-based interventions. And using the data effectively. So MTSS went K-12 at least 1 year ago. So this had huge implications for those LEAs with high schools who are using Section 31A, but have not implemented MTSS or an evidence-based approach that will fit into the MTSS framework. One of the ways that secondary schools across the country have made significant changes to their achievement, graduation rate, and behavior is through the evidence-based approach, early warning intervention and monitoring systems, or what we refer to as EWIMS, or some people say early warning systems. It is a systematic approach used by dedicated teams of school staff to identify students at risk of not graduating on time, assigning students to interventions during the day, and monitoring their progress. Indicators that are commonly used are attendance, behavior, and course completion or performance. We've also provided you a link to the evidence-based information about MDE warning early intervention systems that we have collaborated with the Great Lakes Comprehensive Center. So please take a look at that if you are wondering about EWIMS or you know you're doing EWIMS, but you want to have some more information. Have you mastered the master schedule? So in 6th grade, from 6th grade to 12th grade, the master schedule process is about organizing and coordinating your resources to enhance learning and promote academic excellence for all students. These important decisions must be guided by our key values as schools and educational leaders. Some of the questions that you may have to ask about the master schedule is there ethnic and socioeconomic demographic parity in enrollment for our most advanced courses? Or are we tracking low income and minority students into less advanced courses? Are we providing students equal access to the schedules most aligned with their academic goals? Or is our scheduling process driven by the needs of the most advanced students? Or is the master schedule only driven by adult wants? The master schedule to a school is what grading policies are to teachers and classrooms. It reveals the true beliefs, attitudes, values, and priorities of the school. The school's master schedule is like looking at an MRI of the inner workings of a school. It is the window to the soul of the school. Within this slide is an article about how a principal took on her master schedule, although it made a lot of people uncomfortable, but the schedule was about and built around adults instead of students. And in some of our high schools, this is what we see. The schedule was built around the adults and not the students, with the students not having supports during the day to help them, but being done after school. When a lot of us know high schoolers are not coming to tutoring after school. We have to catch them while they're there. So please take a look at this. We've embedded that link for you if you would like to look at that. Subsection 4 is about the allocation. This is about the counts of students identified as economically disadvantaged. And so this is how the district's allocation is determined every year. Allocations for economically disadvantaged are based on the previous year's ED count. So your allocation from this year was based on October 2018 ED count. It's very important to understand how students are being identified and recorded during the upload of students into MSDS during the 3 general collection periods of fall, winter, and spring. More importantly, who is responsible for identification and collection of eligible students? And what are the procedures in the LEA? We've had a lot of LEAs who have been shocked when their allocation has gone down because they had gone to community eligibility provision, meaning you're a CEP, 100% of students will get free breakfast and lunch. And even though that is a great program, you still have to collect the information on the household information report. Because if you don't have those numbers from that household information report, other than those students who are identified automatically, then that means that your numbers will go down. So that is a special rule that has been applied. There's going to be a special calculation based on the percentage of students reported as ED, I believe from a year or two ago. That's something with state A. We haven't heard about all of the special rules that's going to be implemented for that, for those schools, but there is something in the legislation to account for that. So your LEA written procedures in terms of collecting the family economic status. The household information report has been changed in order to allow for easier collection for our districts. That is also available for you in the Office of School and Health Nutrition. I believe it is on their webpage. So it is a sample, like the sample that you see identified here, and the school just simply inserts your tag name and letter, and you'll be able to fill it out for yourselves and have that to collect that report from the parents in the beginning of the school year. Again, that's a household information report. So subsection 5 is about the use of funds. So some generally allowable costs are instructional programs, direct non-instructional services such as medical, mental health, counseling services for at-risk pupils, school health clinics, meaning the school nurse, not the infrastructure, school security, so not more than 20% of the district's total allocation, in which at least 50% of your pupils in membership were determined economically disadvantaged. You may utilize the funding for school security, but it also must align to the needs assessment and the MTSS model. That simply means if you have security personnel who are employed and you're using that 20%, that person must also be a positive part of the MTSS framework. It can be conducted before, during, after school, or extended school year, but Section 31A as categorical supplemental funding cannot be used for an administrative cost. So let's talk about the why behind the whole child focus on what's important. So MDE believes caring for, supporting, and educating the whole child is an essential part of promoting academic achievement and excellence through the prenatal age through age 20. Having a common definition and understanding of the whole child sets the stage for action. The practical aspects of promoting the whole child requires an approach that encompasses evidence-based practices. MDE supports the whole child, whole school, whole community model, a leading national model. The WSCC model was developed in collaboration by education and public health practitioners, the ASCD and Centers for Disease Control. And although we know there can be some barriers to student success in their learning, we know that there has been much research that tells us that with a relentless focus on improving our systems through the improvement process and a focus on the whole child, that our students, staff, and teachers can experience the success of academic achievement in their schools and districts. MyKIP is the Michigan Integrated Continuous Improvement Process, which you can see identified in the slide. It's a better way to think about school and district improvement efforts, and our technical assistance and guidance over the past few years has always been grounded in the best research in the CIP process and will continue to be aligned to best practices in education. MyKIF involves a shift in how we think about improving student outcomes. So changing the mindset and examining root cause to engage in a comprehensive and iterative continuous improvement process cycle using a streamlined, integrated, web-based software application platform. So remember that when redirection and accountability came out, we developed a lot of set of tools that were available to you to really make some team-based decisions about if you had to redirect funding. Well, they've now been renamed. We have been told that there were some great tools to really examine the root causes of things that are going on and the district. So they are still available to you. They are on Section 31A website, along with our frequently asked questions, which is also being updated based on this year's legislation. So it may not be the latest one. The Program Review Companion Guide, which has the monitor indicators built in it, but also has the rubrics for expectation levels. And the tools, some of them have been renamed. One that is utilized a lot is the Section 31A At-Risk Planning Guide. So those steps in which you go through the process of identifying what you've been already using and how you've been evaluating it, and your inventory analysis and worksheet. All those items are still available on the Section 31A webpage, and we please encourage you to use those with your teams. Subsection 6 is about use of funds for school breakfast. Schools that meet the qualification, 20% or more students have been identified as economically disadvantaged, must serve school breakfast. Therefore, Section 31A must be utilized from a penny to $10 per pupil to fund school breakfast. Even if the district is CEP, community eligibility provision, schools, even with fiscal agents that are provided 100% reimbursement on breakfast and lunch, must still provide some amount of funding from Section 31A to support school breakfast. If the LEA has elected to serve school breakfast, then the LEA must utilize Section 31A funding for school breakfast. If you have questions about being exempt, you do need to contact the Office of School Health and Nutrition. But if you are CEP and you don't know what to spend the funding on, you also want to call School Health and Nutrition because they have great ideas about how to spend the money. So subsection 7 is about primary healthcare services. So these are funds that are allocated in subsection 1 to support primary healthcare service for children from birth to 21. These funds are a joint expenditure and are expended in a form and manner determined by MDE and Department of Health and Human Services. So if you wanted to use them in that manner, you would have to contact Michigan Department of Health and Human Services. So these monies are allocated in subsection 8 for vision and hearing screenings. You want to contact your local health department about this, but a portion of Section 31A funding is set aside to cover the state portion of hearing and vision screenings. Subsection 9 is about the annual program and fiscal report. So each school and district must submit a final fiscal report by July 15th. The form is provided by MDE and Max Plus. It gives us a description of program and services performed, an amount of funds for these programs and services, the total number of pupils identified as at-risk eligible and served by these programs and services. And also, this form is also utilized to give to the Michigan Department of Health and Services so they can verify matching funds for those who are in need of the Assistance for Needy Families and for the SNAP program. So with the AFPR, it must be turned in by July 15th. If the APFR is still not turned in within another month by September 30th, the department shall withhold an amount equal to the August payment until the LEA submits its report. If the LEA does not comply by the end of the state fiscal year, the withheld funds shall be forfeited to the school aid fund. So if you need technical assistance with the APFR, you do want to contact us. The thing about the APFR is that everyone needs to coordinate so the correct and accurate information and that negative carryover or tons of carryover have not been identified. So does finance and human resource understand the important role that they play in team-based decision-making is really what it comes down to, because everyone needs to communicate about how funding has been spent during the year. Our money is intentionally being spent to make the most impact for academic achievement growth, and how are resources used effectively and efficiently to leverage the most change for students' academic achievement. So these are some of the questions that we end up coming up with when sometimes we identify APFRs that are either have negative carryover or more than 25% of carryover identified as we go through those that are submitted. Subsection 10 relates to audits. So the department can complete an audit either by form of on-site review or a desk review. The district must provide reimbursement for disallowances found in the audit. When we do come on site for on-site review, we do want to hear about what's going well, the points of pride, but we also want to help guide a discussion about what the processes are, what's in place, why, if it's being evaluated, and are they yielding the achievement results? Are you getting a return on an investment? Subsection 11 is school-wide reform. So school-wide reform pretty much has not changed. They only added some more language to kind of redefine it. So subsections 6, 7, and 8 for schools in which more than 40% of pupils are identified as at-risk eligible. A district or a public school academy may use the funds it receives under this section to implement Tier 1 evidence-based practices and school-wide reforms that are guided by the district's comprehensive needs assessment and are included in the district improvement plan. School-wide reforms must include parent and community supports, activities, and services. And you may also use Pathways to Potential program, which is implemented by the Department of Health and Human Services, or the Community and Schools programs. So for school-wide reform, instructional, non-instructional services must be aligned with what's indicated in the DIP and the SIP by your CNA, your Comprehensive Needs Assessment. Before we start examining the symptoms that occur in the LEA, the LEA's leadership team needs to do some thorough investigating, because school-wide reform is an awesome opportunity to put some things in place to help our students the most. So school-wide reform has also been further defined. Tier 1 evidence-based practices, meaning research-based instruction and classroom interventions that are available to all learners and effectively meets the needs of most pupils. So this is brand new to school-wide reform for this year. So if your team is thinking about school-wide reform, one of the things that we refer you to, or a great resource, is the What Works Clearinghouse website. It is a review of existing research that is out there about different models, different programming, provides educators and district administrators with information that you can examine. It is a focus on high quality research. So that's just one, but a very good resource that is available to you. So we've provided that link in there for you to be able to examine. So when you talk about, and if you qualify for school-wide reform, as I said, it's a great opportunity to start in the right direction. And when a district leadership team conducts an assessment, hopefully there will be some digging that reveals the root causes of the symptoms. One of the reasons why we included systemic thinking is because sometimes we look at all the events that happen over the surface and nothing that happened below the surface to truly identify what the root cause is. So we strongly encourage some root cause exploration, that you leverage the item that you can control to get the best kind of result, that you're examining the boundaries of why some of these root causes are in place, and what are some of those subsystems functioning. Some of the examples of things that we hear that are symptoms: students just don't know how to behave in class. Students are not able to persist like other students. High percentages of low-income students stuck in tutoring and intervention models for more than 9 weeks at a time. These are things that we have to ask why 5 times, because we're spending a lot of money on these different things. So we want to really use our resources efficiently to be able to help the students. So MDE has also defined the parent engagement, and our family engagement definition has been changed. So you want to be able to go onto our website and really look at the family engagement pieces, because they have been more defined and there's a lots more resources available to schools. But the definition is: family engagement is the collaborative relationship between families, educators, providers, and partners to support and improve learning, development, and the health of every learner. So this is a shared definition for family engagement. And a set of engagement principles on the MDE Family Engagement webpage, which has been embedded here for you to be able to visit. And it's all about relationships. And this is the official graphic with the 5 principles of family engagement. The outermost circle of the circle shows us the who, and our goal is to build a partnership that encompasses educators, families, providers, and community supports. The next inner circle shows us the how. that building relationships, ensuring that families are supporting partners, providing meaningful, intentional opportunities for families to engage that are linked to learner outcomes and tailored to meet the needs of all families, and ensuring positive learning environments are all key building blocks to accomplishing our goal of family engagement. So the how is the making connections, the recognizing the barriers that families and community supports have, communicating with all of our families, shared decision making. So doing things with our families, but not doing things to them and asking them what they need the most from us as the school community. How do we support learning at home and volunteering? These are the hows. And please, we encourage you to go to the family engagement website because there's some new resources that really talk about how can we do some out of the box, non-traditional ways of engaging families within our school communities. Subsection 12 is a little new for us. So that amount that you are able to allocate for professional learning has been changed. So a district or public school academy that receives funds under this section may use now up to 7.5% of those funds to implement research-based professional development to implement a coaching model that supports the MTSS framework, but the PD must be aligned to the state of Michigan learning professional learning standards, integrated into district school and classroom practices, and solely related to MTS implementation with fidelity and systems data, and read by grade 3 law implementation. So just to recap, 7.5% of the district's total allocation can go to professional learning as designated here. And the PD for the coach does not fall under the 7.5% cap. This is for professional learning, for support staff, for teachers, for district administrators, that's integrated into the district school and classroom practices. Now, if you have an instructional behavioral coach and you are paying them with Section 31A, you may use 100% of your money to pay an instructional or behavioral coach, qualified people, and their coaching, their professional development. As we know, they need to continually update themselves to build the capacity of our teachers. So their professional learning is covered here under instructional behavioral coaches. So that's 100%. There is no cap on their learning. Since there was information that went out 2 years ago about us having coaches being employed with Section 31A, we really thought it was important to get a consistent definition about what coaching should feel and look like, and whom those people would be supporting. So you want to look at the MDE coaching definition. We highly encourage you to include some of this in your own job descriptions, but to keep it in mind when you are searching for that individual that's going to build the capacity and build the trust within your organization to support your teachers and supporting your students. So Section 31A does have a coach guidance. So capacity to fulfill the role and expectations for coach, a specialized knowledge set, skills and training for the identified grade and span and subject area, any cross-curricular integration. They know balanced comprehensive assessment systems and instructional best practices, such as how to deliver best practices and instruction, student engagement, technology, competency-based learning, and knowledge of and experience with tiered instructional support systems, of course. So this is the guidance we provide. And also you can read the behavioral coach expectations at your leisure. Subsection 14 is about proration. So remember I said that those were hold harmless were included this year. So if we have new schools that are added in the middle of the year, that means that everyone will get a cut. Depending on what the cut is, 2%, 4%, 5%. It'll be an equal percentage per district across the state of Michigan. Subsection 15 is if a school closes, if that district is dissolved, then they must send those funds back, and then those funds will be redistributed amongst the rest of the districts in the state. Subsection 16 is about additional funding. This was accountability, but now it's about distribution of additional 12 million to districts that have lower funding. This is a new provision, and we haven't received all of the information from state aid about it, but I'm sure it's about giving those monies to those districts that were lowered because they had not collected the House information report and their ED count went down. So we believe this is what this provision is about. So we're going to get some more information about this soon. Subsection 17 is about the use of funds. So the LEA may provide an anti-bullying or crisis intervention program. The only thing that we ask you about this is it evidence-based? Are you monitoring for fidelity of implementation? Are you monitoring programs to determine impact on achievement? And of course, we ask you that with anything that Section 31A is spent on. Subsection 18, if you can use it, Pathways to Potential Success Program. This is monitored by the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services. And success coaches can partner with the school districts to provide some absolutely great resources. They are some great people who can help you with chronic absenteeism, graduation rate, college readiness, parent and community engagement. They often have great relationships with the parents that we sometimes struggle with, and they get those kids into seats and get them into school and with high achievement. So are interested in the Pathways to Potential Success program. It's not just for schools that are not proficient in K-3, but it is almost like a first come, first serve. You want to contact your Michigan department, your local MDHHS office about this. Subsection 19 is the definition of at-risk pupil. So for all those pupils in grades K to 12, for whom the district has documentation that the pupil meets any of these criteria, they can be considered at risk. The three that you see bolded are automatically coded. Economically disadvantaged, an English learner, and an immigrant who has immigrated within the preceding 3 years are automatically coded in MTSS ED for you. However, those students that you see here listed, chronically absent, victim of child abuse, pregnant teenager, the district must have documentation of such. If we're on an on-site review and we ask for the documentation to prove that these children are in fact so, and saying that you identified them as at risk. And of course, your documentation for your assessments, if they're at risk. So you want to make sure you do have that information. So again, your designated at-risk students, as reported to MSDS and uploaded to CEPI, meet the following criteria, and the LEA has documentation of that. Your designated ED students, as reported in MSDS and uploaded to CEPI, they meet the following criteria. And they are either students who are qualifying for free and reduced meals, household receiving SNAP or TANF, homeless, migrant, or foster care. So those who are automatically identified, you do not have to have anything because you already have the direct cert. But the other students, you do have to have documentation. So, you know, sometimes we come upon this, we don't get all the identification sheets or they haven't been done. So again, team, we have to really talk about, is there proper identification for the at-risk criteria for students? And how do you make sure that whomever is doing it understands the definition for these special population groups? And most importantly, our students being uploaded 3 times per year to MSDS. So we're coming to the end of our presentation. We have provided a wealth of resources related to attendance, also to EWIMS and MTSS as secondary, because we do get lots of questions about that, and also family engagement, and some of that information about targeted universalism have been provided here for you. And then, as always, you may contact any one of us. I am Stephanie Holmes Webster. We also have Ms. Joan Jackson, and also Don Carmody, and Mrs. Michelle Williams is also our Special Populations Unit Manager. So I'm going to stop the share. It is 11:23. I added an additional 15 minutes in case we had any questions. I see 2 possibly in the chat. So I'll take those first. And you can unmute yourself if you want to ask a verbal question, but I'm going to go over these 2 first. One says changing assessments inconsistency on the 31 identification worksheet, ongoing narrative around funding at-risk students at higher levels, change and redirection election. How can all this data be compared one year to the next? Doesn't mean anything at all. I'm not sure what the question is, because Section 31A, everyone knows that it has been changing every year, and we hope and pray that they stop doing that to us. Well, it's very hard to compare, let's say, 8th grade mathematics data, because one year, last year, you all changed the PSAT. The year before that, it was MSTEP. Hopefully those things are going to level out. That's all I can really tell you about that. What the best thing I can tell you to do as a LEA is to use the multiple measures that you have in your local benchmark assessments and really rely more on those. The state summative assessment is one snapshot in time. But when you're looking at your local benchmark assessments, when you're looking at either your NWEA or you're looking at perhaps in high school, you do academic approach and you use the SAT, you're taking the SATs also. You want to be looking at the integrated reliability of those assessments and how you're using them to inform the district level funding, what you do with those monies, and how you inform classroom instruction. And that's really the most important piece that you want to look at, is what you have in your district and how well it's informing the district and the building and classrooms. Second question we have is, what is the current thinking around how federal changes to SNAP guidelines may or may not impact access to free and reduced lunches associated with at-risk funding levels at the state level? You personally don't really want me to answer that question. I think it's deplorable that we would deny access to those who are already food insecure to give them further food insecurity. So, I mean, that's really a federal level question. We don't have control over the threshold levels that are identified for those programs, and that's unfortunate. Question, are you emailing this to us or where do we get the PowerPoint? Yes. Either I can email it to you, I can probably put it in the chat box and everybody can get it. So I can do that. It's not posted on the website, but again, I said I think I can add it to the chat box. Somebody asked me a question privately. Will you explain how we can't use funds to pay for K-12 teachers? It seems to be a big confusion for some districts. Okay, so Section 31A is supplemental categorical funding. If the district is offering in a high school, you're offering English language arts, mathematics, science, and social studies. Those positions have to come out of the general funding. If you're offering tutoring programs or supports for students during the day for high school, then you could fund those positions because they're supplemental with Section 31A funding. But that's the way that the program is designed. Now, until 3 or 4 years ago, because you had not had 3 people in Section 31A, we realized that folks would just stick in Section 31A wherever they wanted to. But here's the thing. Some of you have been contacted over the past, I say, month from the Office Auditor General's office to find out how you're spending money. And then in turn, we've been finding out the various reasons why Section 31A is supplemental categorical funding, because it's supplemental. It's not for the regular FTE in most cases. Now, if you have specific questions about specific district context, then you do want to contact us and we can try and talk you through and find out different ways that perhaps funding can be used. But in general, no, it's not to pay for entire districts or entire buildings of people. That's just not what it was made for. Are there any other questions? I have one question here. You mentioned that the categories in bold for identification were automatically identified as 31A. Does that mean we do not need to mark them 3060 in our SIS systems? So that's 2 different things. So in MSDS 3060, those that are identified in bold, they will be automatically certified or identified 3060 for you in CEPI system, but not in yours. So You still have to identify them in your own personal school district system, but in terms of what comes from CEPI and what's directly certified, that's already done for you. Are there any other questions? So we have about 10 more minutes. If you have some more questions about funding usage, allowances, annual program and fiscal report, MTSS,